Hello friends, welcome back to Spiritism for All. Today we continue to study the book Behind the Scenes of Obsession and the chapter Examining the Obsession. Among those who are treated as insane, there are many who are really subjugated instead. They require moral treatment because they become truly insane when they are given treatments intended for an organic cause. When doctors understand Spiritism sufficiently, they will know how to make the distinction and will heal a large number of ill persons that they do with their present techniques. It's written at the Medium's book from Allan Kardec. Item 254. The codifier rightly asserted that the knowledge of Spiritism, far from facilitating the predominance of evil spirits, will have as a result, in a more or less close time, and when it be propagated, to destroy the obsession predominance, giving to everybody the means to guard themselves against the obsessor's suggestions. And the enlightened master, not infrequently, although being a profound connoisseur of magnetism, attended to various obsessed ones using the efficient methods of the Spiritist doctrine to safely free them through the moralization of the disturbing spirit and the disturbed sensitive. Obsession, according to Allan Kardec, is the domain that some spirits manage to acquire over certain people. It's never practiced except by inferior spirits who seek to dominate. Good spirits inflict no constraints. They advise, fight the influence of the wicked, and if we do not listen to them, they withdraw. The bad ones, on the contrary, cling to those they can prey on. If they come to dominate one, they identify with his spirit and lead him as if he were a real child. It is still the egregious interpreter of the spirits of light who comments. The motives behind obsession vary according to the character of the spirits. At times they entail revenge against persons who wronged them during their present life or in a previous one. Quite often it's simply the desire to do evil, since because they suffer, they wish to make others suffer too, feeling a kind of pleasure of tormenting and humiliating them. The impatience of their victims also excites them, because they then accomplish their objective. However, if their victims are patient, they tire of the game. And he continues, there are obsessive spirits without malice, which denote something good, but dominated by the pride of false knowledge. It's written at the Medium's book, items 245 and 246. Nebuchadnezzar II the Great, King of Chaldea, disturbed by avenging spirits, experienced unspeakable torments, obsessed, descending to a miserable condition of abnormality. Tiberius, whose mind was directed by merciless spirits, reached a high level of cruelty due to the exacerbated distrust insufflated by discarnated opponents. Domitius Nero, sadly celebrated after an existence of madness, overwhelmed by cruel enemies from beyond the tomb, frequently dreamed with his mother Agrippina and his wife Octavia, who were murdered on his order, foreshadowing his painful end. And yet, in the sublime epic of the Gospel, parade alongside Jesus on a large scale those tormented and unhappy spirits who find in him the divine physician who loosens their hearts and frees them from suffering. Rabbi Galileo's disciples over and over again applied the healing blessings to the countless obsessed people who sought them out, continuing their apostolic ministry among the tormented on earth and the disturbed ones in the spiritual world, as the Master had done. And after them, the historical records show madmen of varied nomenclature dealing with tormenting entities, suffering at the stake and in exile, or in the snake pit and in the dark asylums, the result of the psychic coexistence with those who cross the portal of immortality and linger in vitiations and feelings in which they delighted. Asseverated Allan Kardec. Since it was neither mediums nor spiritists who created spirits, but rather it was the spirits who gave origin to spiritists and mediums, and since spirits are simply human souls, it's obvious that spirits have existed as long as humans have, and that they have always exerted their beneficial or harmful influence on humankind. The mediumistic faculty is for them only a way to manifest themselves, and in the absence of this faculty, they do so in 1,000 other ways that are more concealed or less so. As he clarifies, the means of combating obsession vary depending on the characteristics in which it appears, adding that the moral imperfections of those who are obsessed are frequently an obstacle to their liberation. It's written at the Medium's Book from Allan Kardec, items 244, 249, and 252. Obsession, however, is still today a terrible obstacle to the peace and serenity of the creatures. Originated in the intimacy of the incarnated spirit, obsessions exist on an infinite scale, and consequently obsessed exist in an infinite variety, and the etiopathogenesis of such imbalances, generically called mental disorders, are much broader than the classical classification, deserving special attention to those called karmic causes. As an immortal being, the spirit brings in himself the karmic germs that facilitate the coexistence with the enemies of the past, giving rise to the disastrous communions. However, not only hate, as one might think, is the causal factor of obsessions, and not only on earth do obsessive torments manifest. Beyond the grave, and in the poignant and afflicting regions of imperative readjustments and unavoidable awakenings of consciences, many torturers and victims are confronted, beginning or continuing the nefarious banquets of psychic subjugation in an endless struggle for impossible extermination. Obsessors have been linked to crime for millennia in structures of unusual despair in which they voluntarily linger, taking on roles of persecutors of other less powerful obsessors, who, in pursuit, are also slaves of those who feed at their expense, connected by vigorous and cruel forces. On earth, equally, there is a very large number of incarnates who, through irresponsibility and invigilance, become obsessors of other incarnates, establishing a consortium of difficult eradication and prolonged duration, almost always in the form of unconscious and persistent vampirism. In addition to these diversified forms of obsession, there are others, unconscious or not, among which those produced in the name of tyrannizing love to those who linger incarnate, tormented by those who left in a painful state of disturbance and egocentrism, or among incarnates who keeps an unhappy and time-consuming mental partnership. Obsessors, obsessed. Obsession, in whatever form, is a long-term illness requiring specialized therapy with safe application and results that cannot be acquired quickly. Obsession treatments, therefore, are complex, imposing a high dose of renunciation and abnegation on those who offer themselves and dedicate themselves to this task. A force exists capable of producing results with incarnated or discarnated persecutors, conscious or unconscious, the one that derives from moral conduct of the counseling mediums. At first, the obsessor doesn't notice it. However, over time, the testimonies of moral elevation that he entails, confirming the nobility of the faith which he possesses as a servant of Christ, come together to convince the obsessor about the elevation of moral principles derived from the beliefs and practices of the counseling medium, frequently ending in the freedom of the obsessed. This is because most of the results of obsession treatments depend on the patient. Once the recovery program is started, he should immediately make an effort to radically change his behavior, exercising in the practice of Christian virtues, and above all, moralizing himself. The patient's moralization must be his priority, considering that through a well-initiated, intimate renewal, he demonstrates to his disaffection, the obsessor, the efficiency of the guidelines that they offer him as a normative of happiness. It's worth considering that the organic and psychic wear of the sick medium, even after the malevolent spiritist's withdrawal, causes a longer recovery period, requiring at times, understandably, prolonged medical assistance. In face of the combined efforts between the assistant and the assisted, The superior spirits interested in the progress of humanity also offer valuable resources which constitute healthy and precious elements. Without such support, any incursion that is intended in the ministry of this obsession will be useless, if not dangerous, due to the negative results it presents. A disobsession worker properly prepared for the experiences of helping the obsessed is a powerful dynamo that generates electromagnetic energy which, applied through healing blesses, produces dystonia and emotional maladjustments in the unwanted guest, pushing him away for a while and thus providing to the host the mental liberation necessary for moral asceticism, will re-education, prayer meditation, in a truly well-disciplined evangelical program that safely and slowly builds a moral defensive citadel around himself. That's why the Master, faced with certain discarnated persecutors, said, "Against this kind of spirits, only prayer and fasting." And after attending to the afflictions of each tormented person who sought him, he prescribed, invariable and incisive, "Do not return to sin, so that something worse doesn't happen to you." When you hear in the recesses of your mind a tortuous idea that insists on fixing itself, interrupting the course of the thoughts, when there's an imperious active psychic force interfering with your mental processes, when you see your will being dominated by another will that seems to prevail, when you experience growing restlessness in mental intimacy for no real reason, when you feel the impact of the unfolding spiritual disarray, beware, because you are in an imperious and furious process of fierce obsession. Mental transmission from brain to brain obsession is an alarming syndrome that reveals a serious illness that is difficult to eradicate. At first, it manifests itself as a subtle inspiration, then untimely, but in time it becomes interference of the obsessing mind upon the incarnated mind, with a vigor that reaches a climax in the lamentable possession. Negative idea that fixes itself, mental field that weakens, giving rise to negative ideas that will come. In the same way that organic diseases manifest themselves where there is a lack of protection, the obsessive field moves from the mind to the somatic department, where the moral imperfections of the past left deep marks in the perispirit. Some habits that may cause or increase obsession. Smoking. Smoking, due to the damage it causes to the body, is for this very reason a danger to the body and mind. A vicious habit. It facilitates the interference of the disembodied minds, also addicted, which are linked in a simple obsessive exchange on its way to painful disharmonies. Alcohophobia. Although necessary for the body subjected to cold climates, alcohol in minimal doses accelerates digestion, facilitating diuresis. an observation from the spiritual author. Some doctors talk about the unnecessary use of alcoholics even in cold climates. Continuing. However, due to the social and moral consequences that it entails, when it is perverted in criminal addiction, simple at first and then turning to aberrant viciousness, it turns to a vehicle for cruel obsessors, giving rise to merciless vampirism to disembodied alcoholics, with consequent injuries to the psychic system. Sexuality. As a door of sanctification for life, an author for the preservation of species, it's also a vehicle for hallucinating manifestations of tormented minds in a state of persistent anguish. Through it, they turn into disembodied consciousness in indescribable affliction, diving into violent accommodation inside incarnated minds, to linger on destructive absorptions of the nervous plasma, generating degrading obsessions. Narcotics. Ahead of the depressing action of certain drugs that act on the nervous centers, the subconscious registers and impressions of the past resurface mixed with the frustrations of the present, performing an unbalanced marriage, through which discarnated in emotional despair satiate themselves, connecting with the tormented incarnated ones on earth, combining their madness with theirs in wild spiritual possession. Gluttony, backbiting, anger, jealousy, envy, haughtiness, avarice, fear, selfishness. These are access roads for minds unhitched from the somatic car in a stormy and vigilant search in eroticity, thirst for people to vampirize, which whom, in secure connection, they may continue to the deceitful feast of the lost organic pleasures. For this reason, the Spiritist doctrine, in summoning man to love and study, prescribes as a standard of conduct the living and active gospel, noble treatise of mental hygiene, through whose lessons the spirit acquires vitality and renewal, firmness and dignity, teaching the prayer that entails communion with God, prescribing fasting to crime and abstinence in relation to error, in a saving compilation of laws for a healthy existence on earth, seeking a perfect spiritual life. The problem of obsession in any respect considered is also the problem of the obsessed himself. Tormented by evocations fixed on the sensitive screams of the past, the incarnated mind keeps linked to the disembodied mind, suffering at first subtle imbalances that later take over the brain organization, generating a deplorable stage of vampirization in which the victim and obsessor complete each other in a painful and prolonged conjugation. The etiology of obsessions is complex and profound, as it originates in regrettable moral processes, in which both partners of dementing affliction allow themselves to be consumed by the degenerating vibration of criminality that was invariably ignored by the collectivity where they lived as protagonists of drama or tragic comedy in which they were consumed. Rediscovering himself, however, under the imposition of the inexorable laws of divine justice, which establishes that the aggressor will keep connected to the victim, regardless of the time in carnal clothing that distances or characterizes them. The mental trade begins, sometimes in the early days of fetal conceptions, to grow in firm communion in the day-to-day of the carnal journey, when it does not precede conception itself. Simple obsession, fascination, and subjugation, according to the classification of the encoder of Spiritism, it's always difficult to extirpate, because the obsessed himself is a spiritually sick person, living the inner restlessness that slowly and surely disarms him. He proceeds in common life as if he were balanced, but in moments of solitude he allows himself to be dragged into anomalous states of mind under the strong tenacious of the disembodied persecutor. Hearing the telepathic message transmitted by the free mind, he begins by accepting the appeal that comes to him, eventually transforming himself into dialogues in which he lets himself be overcome by the tenacious avenger's intelligence. Subtly juxtaposing brain to brain, mind to mind, dominant will over will that lets himself to be dominated, organ to organ, using the perispirit through which he identifies himself with the incarnate, through which contact the more coercive turns the presence of the guest, who transforms himself into an insidious parasite, establishing later and often definitively, while in the carnal struggle, the strange symbiosis in which the power of fixation of the dominating spirit will manage to extinguish the lucidity of the dominated, which lets himself to be quenched. In every obsession, even the simplest cases, the incarnated person carries within himself the predisposing and preponderant factors, the moral debts to be redeemed, that make alienation possible. Almost always neglectful of moral and spiritual values, respectable defenses that build a stronghold in the soul that's difficult to transpose. The candidate for the obsessive process is irritable, if not nostalgic, giving rise to the spiritual exchange due to his impressionable character, which can also begin in moments of partial detachment of the spirit while asleep, when he encounters his enemy or his long-term victim and feels the sting of remorse or the anger, opening the floodgates of thought to the communications that will soon come without being able to predict when the obsession will end, since it may persist even after death. Once the mental contact is established, in which the incarnate registers the interference of the invading mind, the alarming signal of the obsession in full development sounds. In this regard, Spiritism, and only it, since it deals with the study of the nature of the spirits, has the antibodies and the effective treatments to operate the release of the sick. A release that, however, depends a lot on the patient, as in all pathological processes attended by the various medical therapies. Since the obsessed is a condemned adapter, it's essential that he wants to work hard for his own rescue before the universal consciousness, acting in a positive way to meet the sacred impositions of harmony established by God, the sublime legislator. Despite the moral restoration desire of the spiritual patients, it's imperative his practice of good behavior and sincere devotion to intimate renewal in order to obtain titles of love and work to attest his real change in relation to the past conduct, helping the discarnated companion likewise preluminate himself. In this sense, the interference of fraternal help by other hearts dedicated to the practice of charity is very valuable, favoring to the discarnated the opportunity to acquire knowledge through tormented psychophony, through which he can get the strength to learn, meditate, forgive, and forget. However, such an undertaking in the way it's necessary is not easy. Only a few Spiritist groups among those dedicated to such a task, the disobsession work, are properly equipped, bearing in mind the complexity of the task that it represents. In disobsession, spiritual surgery is often necessary, if not essential, so that the proper results be achieved. In addiction, other special works require abnegation and sacrifice from incarnated cooperators with a natural large-scale donation of valuable moral effort in order to provide the minimal psychotherapeutic conditions in the relief area in favor of the unbalanced spirits to attend. In addition, other special works require abnegation in this regard. The prayer, as advocated by Allan Kardec, is the most powerful means available to move the obsessor from his evil purposes. Therefore, in any rescue operation to which you are called, observe your inner moral disposition and pray, reaching up to Jesus, asking him to make you a target of the pure spirits, through which, and only thus, you will be able to offer something in favor of both obsessors and obsessed. In this way, examine and probe frequently your intimate world in order not to be surprised, even for a moment, by your disarrayed mind responding to the appeals from the discarnated spirits who have been following you, disturbed and unhappy, maddened and searching to do justice with their own hands, transformed into executioners of your serenity. Work for the good with effort and perseverance, so that your example and your struggle may solve the debt illness that marks your soul, freeing you from the harsh test before you have to walk, still afflicted, through a new painful and purifying path. In any circumstance, the noble exercise of mediumship with Jesus, as well as the sublime work developed by serious sections of disobsession, is responsible for the indeclinable ministry of help to the obsession sufferers in order to modify the expressions of pain and anguish that still prevail in the suffered earth of our days. Thank you very much for watching us. In the next chapter we will study special obsessions.